Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent the Senate proceed to legislative session for a period of morning business, with senators permitted to speak therein for up to 10 minutes.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I want to come down and speak today about a very important sector of the economy for Alaska, for America. That's our fishermen, and some important legislation, very bipartisan legislation that I'm trying to move right now that I'm hopeful that everybody can agree to. The Senate has agreed to it previously, and I'm really hopeful that we can do it again right now. You know, I talk about the great state of Alaska being the superpower of seafood. Over 60% of all seafood, commercial, recreational, harvested in America comes from my great state's waters. 60%. So this is a vital industry in my state, but also vital industry in the country. And as my colleagues know, that our fishermen are some of the hardest working Americans. They're also some of the Americans who have been hit the hardest by this pandemic. The Sullivan-Kennedy Act helps these hardworking men and women across the country by providing consistent funding for fisheries research and development and related programs, grant programs, very popular. Decades ago, Mr. President, Congress authorized a group of experts from all around the country, Alaska, East Coast, and vessel owners, fishermen, distributors, to advise the Secretary of Commerce on how to distribute these funds. Makes sense, they're the closest to the action. And over time, unfortunately, this group was disbanded. Nobody thought that was a good idea, abolishing this advisory committee. And then you had the National Marine Fisheries essentially determine how all of these Sullivan-Kennedy funds would be distributed to fishermen. So, with all due respect to the D.C. bureaucrats, they're the ones making the decisions. So we have a bill, my bill, by the way, passed the Senate previously, unanimously, that members in the fishing community from all over the country be chosen to determine how to get these funds out to our fishermen, whether in New York or North Carolina or Alaska. And, Mr. President, everybody thinks that makes sense. Our fishermen need support right now. There's no doubt. They're being hammered by this pandemic. So the legislation, which I'm hopefully going to be able to pass in the Senate here in a couple minutes, has co-sponsors across the broad political spectrum in the Senate. Senator Cantwell, Markey, Warren, Murkowski, myself. Mr. President, I am aware of no policy objections to this important piece of legislation. To the contrary, it's already passed the Senate unanimously. I am, however, aware of an unrelated dispute between the Democratic leader and some of my Senate colleagues from the East Coast regarding an entirely different bill. Now, I respect disagreements over regional issues. I certainly hope my colleagues can work them out, but this issue is thousands of miles away from Alaska and my constituents, the people I represent who are hurting. And moreover, Mr. President, the bill I'm getting ready to introduce, S-494, helps all fishermen nationwide, New York, North Carolina, Alaska. So, Mr. President, the American Fisheries Act, S-494, should not be collateral damage or a hostage taken in an unrelated fight. If my colleagues want to try and work together, I'll certainly help them work out their differences, but I don't think it's constructive to hold hostage this important legislation for a fight that's thousands of miles away from Alaska. So, Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that the Senate proceed to the immediate consideration of calendar number 179, S-494, that the bill be considered read a third time and passed, that the motion to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table with no intervening action or debate.
Is there objection? Without objection.
Objection.
Objection is heard. Senator for New York.
Reserving the right to object, I ask unanimous consent that the request be modified so that in addition to the request from the senator from Alaska, the Senate proceed to the immediate consideration of Calendar 317, Senate Bill 908, the Fluke Fairness Act. I request that the bill be read a third time and passed, and that the motion to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table with no intervening action or debate.
Is there objection to the modification?
Reserving the right to object.
Senator from North Carolina.
Thank you. I've been in the Senate now for 5.5 years, and I don't consider somebody a better friend and advocate for his state than Senator Sullivan. And I've actually spent a lot of times, even though Senator Gillibrand and I have differences in certain situations, we find ways to work together. And what I have before me, though, is something that's very important for people to understand. I agree with everything Senator Sullivan said. His measure, I suspect, has broad support, probably support on its own. But what we have here is the addition by the motion of Senator Gillibrand that affects my state, North Carolina, and it has to do with reallocation of quotas that would particularly affect the flounder industry in North Carolina. I hope that we're able to work out differences. I hope that we can get Senator Sullivan's bill passed, but because it has been amended to include something that hurts my fisheries in North Carolina and my commercial fishermen at the worst possible time when they're suffering like everybody else from the COVID crisis and all the challenges that produces, I do object.
Objection is heard.
Mr. President.
Is there objection to the original request?
I object.
Objection is heard. The senator from Alaska.
Mr. President, well, I'm disappointed, and these are two good friends of mine on the Senate floor right now who I've worked with on numerous pieces of legislation. They both represent their states very well. But, Mr. President, this is a missed opportunity for the fishermen of America. America, not just Alaska, but for the whole country, New York, North Carolina. And I'm certainly hopeful that my good friend from New York and North Carolina can work this out. I will certainly lend my efforts, my staff's efforts, because we shouldn't have a regional fight blocking what will benefit everybody, particularly when fishermen right now are really hurting. They're one of the sectors of the U.S. economy that have been hammered by this pandemic, and this kind of legislation, although it's not going to solve all their problems, shows that we're working for them. So, Mr. President, we will live to fight another day here soon. I hope that we're able to pass my legislation, common sense legislation, the American Fisheries Advisory Committee Act, that will help every fisherman in America. I yield the floor.